Hello, my hellish disciples. Today, I welcome you to a new Criterion Marathon. A spooky, scary, satanic, Halloweeny Criterion Marathon. Without any further ado, let us begin our first film.
Okay, I just finished Vampyr by Theodor Dreyer. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I understand the context in which this film was made. It was released in 1932, filmed in 1930 and 31, and just to put it into perspective, it came out 10 years after Nosferatu did, which is a film that I was expecting this to be a lot like, and it's honestly been so long since I've watched Nosferatu, so I can't exactly recall everything about that film, but they're definitely similar in ways. They're very old vampire films that are mostly silent films, although Vampyr isn't exactly a silent film, actually. I was expecting it to be, but there is some real dialogue spoken in German in this film. So that's kind of interesting about Vampyr. There's not much dialogue, it's more music and other sound design, but there is spoken dialogue in the film. Now, I'm having a really hard time putting into words and just thinking to myself what I actually feel about this film and how I feel about it and if I really enjoyed it, because I'll be honest with you, I have to work on this, but I have not seen more than a dozen films predating the 1950s. 1940s and earlier, I've hardly seen anything, and that's no fault but my own. I gotta do better. I gotta work on that. How many standards was Vampyr setting in its filmmaking? How was it differentiating itself from other films at the time of its release? Because over the years, many films, especially gothic horror films, have mimicked the styles and editing of Vampyr. I'm having such a difficult time putting this into words and just deciding exactly what to say and how I feel about Vampyr. Usually when I critique and just reflect on films, I compare it to other things that I've seen, and I feel like that's really unfair in the case of Vampyr. On one hand, I do think that Vampyr does a really fantastic job with the use of shadows. In a very early part of the film, the camera is sort of panning around in this room and there are people dancing, but you can only see their silhouettes and shadows. It was pretty fantastical and really wonderfully framed. It's definitely a very moody, atmospheric film. There's a ton of fog. They're always by this marshy lake. This film is very clearly gothic, and it definitely served as a blueprint for a lot of gothic horror going forward from when this film was released. So in that way, it is substantial. I do really like in particular the last 15 to 20 minutes of the film, the sequence with our main character in his coffin with the circle cut out so you could see his face and he could see through the top, with all of the people looming over him, staring at him into the coffin, and the shots of the sky and the dead trees and the clouds as they're wheeling his coffin out of the building, I thought was really effective. Something about seeing those trees and those clouds and just thinking, wow, this was so long ago when they filmed this. It's something about that just really affected me for some reason. I don't know why. And another moment that really stood out to me that's kind of in the later half of this film is when our main character goes and sits on a bench, and then there's kind of a fade and there are two of him, and he's kind of split in different ways, and one of him gets up and the other one is still there. It's like his soul leaving his body or something. And that's another thing, is that there are a lot of odd dreamlike sequences in this film. That's kind of a way that I've noticed people explaining this film, and the narrative of it is kind of hard to follow. At first, the first half of it is pretty easy to understand. He's a student going to this town looking for occult type things, I guess. It's a pretty loose story, and we're given a lot of exposition, I guess, in these little readings about vampires. I guess all in all, how I can sum it up is that Vampyr is definitely a gothic horror film that holds a pretty significant amount of importance for the era in which it was made, especially for horror films. Watching it at this point in time, from my perspective of not knowing much about films from this era in general, I feel like it is a little bit slow. It's definitely got some great haunting imagery and sound design, and I really do love the use of shadows, but that's essentially what I think of Vampyr. I think if I were to watch it again and pay even closer attention and watch more of the video essays provided by Criterion, I'd probably get a better idea of where exactly the narrative of this film goes, because it veers off in a lot of strange directions that aren't really explained, and it becomes very dreamlike. But that's Vampyr. I feel like I had a very difficult time putting all of that into words. The camera's been rolling for 21 minutes, and I feel like I barely said anything, so let's just move on to the next film of the marathon.
Hey, are you enjoying this video? Well, if you are, you should go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit that little bell as well to be notified whenever Luke Mick posts a new video. You can also find Luke Mick on Letterboxd, where he oftentimes writes reviews or logs the movies that he's been watching. And if you want channel updates, you can also go to his Luke Mick YouTube Instagram page, where he provides updates for the channel and just posts other weird, goofy pictures and things like that. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, just follow the instructions, links for everything are down below, and enjoy the rest of this marathon, everybody.
Alright, so we just got a dose of some 70s era David Cronenberg with The Brood, and that film was a lot. It was a lot to process in a lot of different ways. So to keep everything straight, I had to write down in front of me a list of all of the weird-ass things that happen in the narrative of this film.
We have like this shady psychiatrist who is very clearly emotionally or mentally abusing his patients in some way, using them in these unethical, showy ways. We have emotional child abuse being dug up from the past. We have physical child abuse actually happening in the present day of this film. There's a character that seemingly has psychic powers of some kind. There are these little phantasm or don't look now dwarves running around killing people. There's a lawsuit going up against this doctor with a couple of former patients of his who are not happy with the treatment that they received from him. There's another character who loses their memory in the most inopportune situations.
There's a lot in this film. For a 92-minute movie, The Brood includes enough things in it, enough plot points that could have been spread into 2 movies, or just been 2 separate movies entirely is what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say there should be a sequel to The Brood, I'm just saying the amount of ideas that are in this film could have made 2 separate films. That's my point. So in that way, the film is paced really well. It's always exhilarating. There's always some crazy new thing happening, but I think it does that to a fault. I feel like they introduce a lot of different ideas into this film, and it just becomes very overwhelming. And I'm gonna kind of lead this into the main character of the film, played by Art Hindle. That's his name. I don't think I've seen him in anything else, although I saw he is credited in Black Christmas, which I have seen, but I don't remember his character in that film. But our main character, who is a father to this young girl who is supposedly being physically abused when she gets to see her mother on the weekends, she comes home with scratches and bruises and cuts on her back, and he's very concerned about it, and he thinks that the psychiatrist or doctor knows something and isn't telling him, so he's kind of having this power battle with the doctor, trying to get his wife out of there and taking custody of the child, and the doctor won't let him do that, so he's trying to get his wife back from this doctor, but he's also upset with his wife, and his daughter's acting very strange. She won't talk to him, and she's going through all these traumatic events, and all of this is happening over the course of what feels like a couple of days, and our main character just never gets a moment to breathe. And that's something that I commend the film for, is giving us this very frantic portrait of this man's life just going crazy all at once. But at the same time, some very traumatic, insane things happen to this character in the film. His mother-in-law and father-in-law get killed within the same 24 hours, and the film doesn't give the character time to react to that, so it makes his performance not seem great either, because he literally finds his dead father-in-law in a bedroom, and there's this little dwarf thing there too that I already mentioned, like the phantasm dwarf, and he's never seems shocked by any of it because the movie just keeps moving on to the next thing, and it was just so, I like the film because it is paced like that, but at the same time, I was just like, we need a second to slow down here. This guy needs to, like, one frame, one scene to just react to this crazy stuff happening. There really isn't a moment in this film where he breaks down. He's very clearly annoyed and just wants to get things wrapped up throughout the film. And I don't need like a big Oscar-worthy moment where he just starts yelling and screaming and tearing up and crying. But it was just so strange to me that he was nonchalant with all of these fatalities within his family in this short amount of time, and then a teacher is killed and he doesn't really react to that either. I'm not trying to make this sound nitpicky, and I do like this film, but I just wish we would have had more, I don't know, more from the character's emotions, I guess. And another character thing I want to mention is the doctor or psychiatrist. What's his name? I wrote it down. Dr. Raglan. He is very much portrayed to be a villain throughout the film and someone that you're not supposed to trust. And up until the final 20 minutes of the film, he keeps that persona of being this barrier to our other characters, not allowing them to achieve what they want to achieve. And it seems like he's just putting fuel on the fire by allowing the wife, what's her name? I wrote her name down too. Nola. So Frank's wife, Nola, is the one with the psychic abilities, and the doctor is very much adding on to her anger and her stress. So he very clearly is a bad guy. And then I don't understand at the end of the film, maybe I missed something, but he essentially sends all of the other patients at his facility away. And he's left only with Nola in the woods. And by the end of the film, Frank finds him in the woods at this little shack, and the doctor explains to him what's going on and how his wife is giving birth to these mutated children. And I was under the impression that the doctor was going to do anything for his study, anything for his research, and that he would have killed Frank for finding out too much, but it turns out that he's actually going to help Frank get his daughter back. But the point I'm trying to get at is just that I thought the doctor character, the psychiatrist, was meant to be a villain, but then his choice to help Frank out in the end and basically throw all of his hard work with Nola down the drain to help Frank and his daughter just didn't seem right. Like, I don't, maybe I missed why he made that choice, or maybe the film was just making us believe he was a bad guy the whole time, but then there was a revelation where we realized, oh, he's actually trying to do the right thing. Maybe I missed where that's really clearly told. I was just like, why is he jeopardizing all of his hard work and research right now? Like, a child's life is at stake, but I was under the impression that he's a type of character that doesn't really care about that. But nonetheless, those are two things, fundamental things with the film where I was just like, I don't know about that. But the rest of it's really entertaining. The music is done by Howard Shore. Right off the bat with the opening credits, I noticed the music and I was like, wow, this is a really great score. We're in for something here. And then I noticed it was done by Howard Shore, who of course did the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy, and a lot of David Cronenberg's other work, I guess, which I didn't know until today. And then of course at the end of the film, in classic Cronenberg fashion, we get a complete body horror freak out at the end, which I was expecting the whole time, and it was pretty glorious and disgusting. I enjoyed watching The Brood. I thought it was entertaining, but I was really kind of thrown for a loop and a little bit confused by some character motivations. I feel like they were really throwing a little bit too much into this film, and it made the motivations of the characters and the plot kind of overly convoluted at times, but that doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy the film overall, and it's another Cronenberg film that I'm happy to have watched. And the thing I've noticed with my relationship with David Cronenberg as a filmmaker, and my relationship as a viewer, of course, I don't know the man personally, I've seen a vast majority of his films. I've seen everything he released in the 80s, good portion of the 90s, lots in the 2000s, some of the 70s, none of his newest films, from the 10s up, but I'm always very excited and intrigued to watch a David Cronenberg film that I haven't seen before. I'm always prepared and ready and excited to watch one of his films, but none of the films that I've seen out of the very large number of them are films that I've ever personally felt like that's a favorite of mine. He makes films that there are things I wish were different about them, but there's always some great intrigue in all of his films, and I really respect him as a filmmaker. It's just so strange to me. I always think in my head, like, yeah, David Cronenberg, he's awesome, man, but then I'm like, none of his films have over like a 4 for me. Many of them I've only seen once. I'm going to be rewatching Videodrome for Halloween because it's been a number of years since I've watched it. I'm expecting with a lot of Cronenberg's films, once you watch it a second time, you'll enjoy it more. Maybe I'm wrong, because I don't think I've ever rewatched a Cronenberg film except maybe The Fly. But that's just a fun little tidbit, a little fun fact for you. That's just my history with Cronenberg. I'm always super excited to watch a new film of his, but I never walk out of them feeling like, yes, that was the best thing ever. I'm always like, that was cool. I wish it did some things different, but I respect it. So I don't know. I don't even know why I had to say that. I just kind of wanted to get that off my chest. I feel like I haven't spoken much about Cronenberg on the channel before, and this is obviously the perfect opportunity, talking about The Brood. So, yeah, that's The Brood. I liked the film. It wasn't as wonderful as I would have hoped it would have been, but I still enjoyed it for the different reasons that I mentioned, and that's all I have to say about it. We are now ready to move on to the final film of this Criterion Marathon. So to wrap up the marathon, we watched Kronos, directed by Guillermo del Toro. Happy belated birthday, Mr. del Toro. I'm going to briefly summarize the plot of Kronos. Essentially, an antique shop owner and his granddaughter discover a device within the shop that has the ability to grant eternal or extended life. It's this little gold mechanical beetle-looking thing that was made 400 years ago by some alchemist who lived for a very long time until he was crushed by a vault or something at a bank. And of course, this device that they find is something that is very sought after by those who know about it, so of course there is an opposing force who's really on the hunt for this thing and will basically do anything to get it, but he feels that it's his duty to keep it hidden, and he also has some sort of bond with this thing. And that's pretty much the main plot of the film. Now, Guillermo del Toro is a filmmaker that has this uncanny ability to take the most bleak situations and turn them into something magical and breathtaking. From the very get-go of this film, with the opening narration about this device and its creation and the score accompanying this narration, it just gives the film such a whimsical feeling. And we also get classic Guillermo del Toro set design and art direction. It was just a very del Toro introduction, and it really got me right from the start. And from there, we're introduced to our grandfather character and his granddaughter, and that's really one of the best parts of this film, is the relationship between these two characters. He's such a likable character. He's so loving to his wife and his granddaughter. He always wants to do what's right. He gets himself into this situation, and he's trying to find the most viable way out of it, and he's trying to please a couple of different people, but he's also not going to be a pushover. He's going to be stern when he has to, and he's just a very admirable, respectable character that I always enjoyed watching throughout this film. And then we're introduced to Ron Pearlman, who I actually forgot was in this movie, who plays the sort of henchman tough guy who's always answering to his uncle, who's very wealthy and basically controls his nephew and uses him as his henchman. And he's really funny. He hates his uncle. He hates getting pushed around, but he has no other choice. And he really is a big piece of the comic relief in this film. And this is a horror film. That's what it's marked as. But this movie doesn't really feel like a horror film. It has horror elements in it. There are some unsettling, sort of mysterious scenes, but there isn't anything blatantly frightening about this film. It felt more like a horror drama, in all honesty, and I think that's because we were given such a strong personal connection with the characters from the very beginning, and nothing really horrific happens in the movie. It almost feels like a classical monster movie of sorts. It's almost like Del Toro's love letter to monster movies, because our main character of Jesus Gris is somebody who is afflicted with this burden of changing and becoming a monster in a way, but in his heart, he's a character who's too pure. It was really refreshing and nice to see, I don't know, such a kind-spirited protagonist in a horror film. I could compare it to The Fly, I guess, just in the way where it's a character whose body is deteriorating, their psyche is changing, their senses are changing. Or I could compare it to Spider-Man. It's very much a movie where somebody, a good person, a pillar of their community, is all of a sudden going down this dark path, and there seems to be nothing they can do about it. I just felt very attached to the characters. I didn't want to see them get hurt. I was rooting for them, and that made it pretty effective for me. I already mentioned the score, but I would just like to say again that it was really great in this film. It gave it that nice classical feeling and also gave it this sort of epicness. Is that even a word? And I'd also just like to mention the art direction and just the cinematography. This very much does look like a Del Toro film, and this is one of his earlier ones. And it just goes to show that even at this point in his career, Del Toro had really refined the look of his films and really made them his own. Everything about this film looks really great, except the makeup towards the end of the film. Our main character has a lot of makeup on his face, and sometimes it looks a little discolored and odd. It looks almost purple at times. Maybe that's what they were going for, but I don't think it looked as good as it could have. I feel like if they would have made it look a little bit more realistic and disgusting, it would have made the film all the more tragic. But it did look just a little bit goofy. And that's another thing. This movie sometimes feels a little bit
campy
and a little bit goofy, and I think it worked in this scenario because, like I said, it isn't a particularly scary film. It has horror elements, but it's also a drama as well, and kind of a light comedic drama. And this is another little symbolic thing that I realized that I don't know if it means anything, but our main character's name is Jesus Grease, and that kind of sounds like Jesus Christ. I wonder if that's something they were going for. Maybe not, but he definitely can be looked at as some sort of Christ figure, I guess. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time with Kronos. I liked the journey that it took me on. I liked watching these characters. I liked each and every one of them for different reasons. It was a pretty funny movie in some ways, and it was just gorgeous. You know, it's classic Del Toro beauty, and that's what I thought of Kronos. I thought it was a great Guillermo del Toro film. I've seen most of his work now, and that's definitely one of the ones that I'm going to hold up there as one of my favorites. I really enjoyed that film. So that's it for this Criterion Marathon. Not as much horror as I was expecting, nothing very frightening, but I've kind of watched a lot of my horror movies already in the Criterion collection, so I didn't have a lot to choose from, but the 3 selected for this video were definitely ones that I've had on my watch list for a long time, and I'm happy to have seen them now. And that's all I've got for you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you are not already and would like to be. And I know I have a running list of suggestions from some of you for films I should watch for Criterion Marathon, but if you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments below what you'd like me to watch and react to, essentially, because that's basically what these Criterion Marathons are, and I will talk to you all later.